Let's do it. I'm going to mute everybody. All right. Well, happy Juneteenth, everyone. Happy Father's Day. I'm James Pollock. I'll be the MC for today's Able Muse Press Zoom reading. I'm very excited because we've got three wonderful poets reading today. I want to start, though, with a brief introduction to Alex Peppel, who's sort of the godfather of all this, and let him say a few words to get us started. So Alexander Peppel, as you may know, founded and edits Able Muse and Able Muse Press, and he founded and directs the Erratosphere online workshop. His own poems and prose have been or soon will be published in Barrow Street, River Styx, American Arts Quarterly, Light, Think Journal, Euphony, Per Contra, La Petite Zine, and elsewhere. And he also edited the Able Muse anthology in 2010. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alex for a few words.
Thank you, Jim. It's very good to see everyone here for another Able Muse reading session. And this time, we're trying an international theme. So essentially, I don't know, maybe I'll say more or less international, because we have some people who have resided overseas, some who are actually writing about overseas, and some but overall we'll have some flavor of the international. And I'm hoping you'll enjoy this afternoon presentation. And I also have to remind everyone that we still have our open reading period for Able Muse Press, which runs until July 15th. So you can send something there if you have any book manuscripts available, poetry, prose, or what have you. And also we have our open reading period for Able Muse itself, which is the journal, and that also runs till July 15th. And you can find all this information from the Able Muse website at ablemuse.com, which is easy to remember. And also don't forget to sign up for our newsletter so you'll be informed of events such as this one and other activities going on around. So thank you all for coming, and without further ado, take it away, Jim.
All right, thanks, Alex. So I'll also point out, maybe Alex just said this, but he's posted links for all of those submissions in the chat. So if you want the super fast way to access all that, that's where to go. Okay, so I just want to advise the audience of one technical thing, and that is the way we're going to handle applause, because I'm sure you'll all want to applaud these poets once you hear their work. Rather than applauding after each poem, I think it would be best to wait until the poet has finished reading all of his or her poems. I've asked them to say thank you to indicate that they've finished, and then you can unmute yourselves and applaud, and then mute yourselves again, please. In fact, well, no, that's enough to say for that. I'll address the question of how we'll do the question and answer session at the end. We'll do a Q&A after all of the readers have finished reading. We'll have plenty of time for that. Okay, so our first reader, by the way, these poets will be reading in alphabetical order by their last name. Our first poet, Michael Cantor's first full-length collection, Life in the Second Circle, was published by Able Muse Press in 2012. And it was a finalist for the Able Muse Prize and the 2013 Massachusetts Book Award for poetry. His most recent collection, Furusato, was released in September 2019 by Kelsey Books. A chapbook, The Performer, Pudding House Press, was published in 2007. His work has appeared in The Dark Horse, Measure, Raintown Review, Frog Pond, New Walk, Think Journal, Light, and many other journals and anthologies. A native New Yorker, Michael has lived and worked in Japan, Latin America, and Europe, and presently divides his time between Plum Island, Massachusetts, and Santa Fe, New Mexico. So please take it away, Michael.
Let me unmute myself. We have to share the screen. Okay. Again, thank you for the introduction, and thank Alex, who is one of my oldest poetry buddies. We've known each other for about 15, 16 years. I've spent a lot of time living overseas, and that has sort of indicated a lot of the poetry that I write. I tend to steal the ideas from my life, and an awful lot of what I write is at least semi-biographical. And then I lie to make it more interesting. That's what poets do, or at least that's what this poet does. So we'll start with a biographical note. I am a semicolon kind of guy, enamored of the curlicue, the dot, the quiet, understated way it's got of letting life just slide and sidle by. A ritualistic pause that may imply a thing or two, a shrug, a sigh, is what I choose to offer, not the cold and hot assaults of passion that can modify a subtle hint into a joust with God. No images, no metaphors, no blood, no wild-eyed horses dying in the mud. I don't make love a war, I simply nod. And as I semi-smile and semi-bow, my semicolon arcs a jaded brow. Okay, the next series is from my experiences living in Japan. Japanese for beginners, Ronin. A Ronin is a samurai without a lord, a hired sword who boldly slaps his sandals down the misted paths of sharp Shikoku hills. And those he kills, he knows from their supporting roles in other blood-soaked Kurosawa epic films. A priest, a beggar monk, a warrior, a drunk. One time he slew a daimyo with one stroke, fought bodyguards and courtiers, all slashed, sent reeling blind through sun-bleached graveled courts, to crash through shoji screens and flimsy walls and die, their crimson handprints still alive on swaying, spattered scrolls. Then helped them up, pulled out a smoke from deep kimono sleeves, swept back his swords and joined the daimyo's crew at Toho's commissary buffet lunch. A pleasant bunch, thieves, peasants, courtesans, stout farmers, artisans and such, all Ronins there, in service of the small, age-beaten lord in glasses and beret, who would quite soon complete his duel, his film, his life, die too. The players left again to slouch from inn to inn, to roam the land without a lord, without a truth, Ronin. The question here is whether Tokyo has really changed or not. Tokyo, 1966, 2016. Derokugi wa utareru. The nail that sticks out will be hammered down, the saying went, as everybody knew. Derokugi wa utareru. Observe, agree, conform, abide. Be true to what you're told. Obey without a frown. Derokugi wa utareru. The nail that sticks out will be hammered down. But that was long ago, and this is now. And surely no one thinks that way today or trains employees on the proper bow. For that was long ago and now is now. And what is very different now is how most businessmen have learned to smile and say, but that was long ago and this is now. And surely no one thinks that way today. The next batch are from my time in Japan. Harry was a friend of mine and the ultimate survivor. He fled Germany shortly before the war, fled to China. From China, he got to the States, made several other stops in Southeast Asia, and eventually ended up in Japan. His motto was, "You can't have too many passports." For Harry, who had 3 passports, I knew a man who had a man who knew a man inside the ministry. He said his man was just the man to see you through whatever difficulties might ensue in sorting out the living from the dead. I knew a man who knew a man who knew back then what Harry really knew, or who he'd ever helped, or who got screwed instead. He was the kind of man who'd see you through his pale blue eyes and sense at once what you most feared and what you'd pay to ease your dread. To meet a man who knew the man who knew. "I'm just a businessman," he'd say, "a Jew without a tribe," and raise his gleaming head. "But you can trust my man to see you through." When others raged, he quietly withdrew, and we all left, but Harry never fled. He knew a man who knew a man who knew the man who was the man to see you through. For Claire. I have begun to dream each night of Claire, pale childhood ghost, her image not quite clear. We were lovers once and young and unaware. Ash gray eyes, short cropped straw light, near white hair, breathless, a street waif look, so au courant that year. I have begun to dream each night of Claire, who found me at a bleak Bruxelles affair. You've not been yet? It is, so near. We were lovers once and young and unaware, and drove all night to Paris on a dare. We go? I know the tout Paris, my dear. I have begun to dream that each night Claire arrives with muscadet, with fruits de mer, fills my anxious mouth and wipes away my fear. She was my lover once and young, and yet aware that food and wine and softly perfumed air would make my awkwardness soon disappear. I have begun to dream. Each night now Claire and I ascend to Sacré-Cœur, her bare skin warm beneath a street-length cloak. And here I am her lover, yes, and young and unaware that one day reveries of times this rare will have an old man blink to fight a tear. I have begun to dream each night of Claire. We were lovers once and young and unaware. Antwerp, 1961. There was a time when mornings were defined by bicycles and sturdy girls who rode them to their office jobs through cold, damp, still dark Flanders winter mornings, full of laughter as they lingered in the downstairs hall. Sweater sleeves pulled down to fingertips, bare, unshaven legs chapped flaming red. A time when colleagues all took pains to call each other Mr. in the paneled rooms. Suit jackets buttoned, wool as thick as armor, protected so They moved among the odors of tobacco, coffee, leather binders, strong colognes, themselves, and shook hands mornings and at lunch, again to mark the end of day. A time to pass the shell-pocked fronts of houses and see, and yet not see. Look past the scars. Wash blood from clotted blood. Put stone on stone. Restore the earth. Rebuild and resurrect. And do not ask whose blood, what earth, which God, but hope that something had been learned in blood. There was this time, one time, and then it passed. Okay, this next one is a New York poem and another villanelle. To an old friend who died young. The first time was a game, we all agreed. A cry for help, of course, but nothing more. And then you dove out over 87th Street. The maid was due at noon. You gambled she'd smell gas as soon as she came near the door. That first time was a game. We all agreed you missed your ex, you shrugged, you blamed the weed, and promised us there would be no encore. But then you broke apart on 87th Street that Sunday morning. What voices did you heed? What madness crept up to the 14th floor? The first time was a game, we all agreed. We spoke of how you always seemed to need attention, called up stunts you'd staged before, and then you sailed out over 87th Street and gave the game an ending guaranteed to make it clear who kept the final score. The first time was a game, we all agreed, and then you plummeted to 87th Street. The next one is about Genghis Khan, and there's no way I can even explain where this came from or what it all means, but it was a lot of fun to write. Sorry. Retired and living in seclusion near Las Vegas, Khan reflects. What I miss mostly is the Golden Horn, my Mongol guys. I'll tell you, we could ride all day and night. Those years our horses poured across the Caucasus, we terrified the West. We were the mother humping pride of Asia, baby. The Turks and Chinese flung their spears away and ran like rats and died. That was a life. Bows all tightly strung, the wind like knives, the ponies strong. We were so young. The old barbarian dabs away a tear, takes some time to readjust his shawl, and waits to catch his breath. It's pleasant here. His books, his row of axes on the wall. His handsome wife now joins us, blonde and tall. Brandy was dancing at the Desert Inn. At first, she didn't go for me at all, but Mongols always find a way to win. She pours herself some tonic and a ton of gin. I'm still pissed off that John Wayne played me, he goes on. The Duke's a mensch. I love the man, but I deserve that role. The studio made me give in. They said that I was shorter than the part required, that their asshole fan base liked its asshole hero 6'4". Technical advisor was a sham to keep me quiet, but we're still at war. I've been around a long time and I know the score. And they screwed me on the royalties and points. What do I know from gross and net? I've learned to fight and kill, not deal with sleaze. I'll get even with the bastards yet. He's tired, Brandy says, and maybe wet. She ends the interview. I say that's fine and mutter that I'm very glad we've met. We hug goodbye Her fingers play with mine. He takes his pills at 8, she breathes. Come back at 9. Okay, and we'll go out with a blaze of sonnets. The next two are just not sonnets, they're monoline sonnets, which I find to be a lot of fun and a challenge to write, and hopefully they don't get boring halfway through. Reunion in Casablanca. Cafe on the veranda. Ilsa sleek, her hair now set off by a silver streak, as beautiful as ever, still a chic and polished avatar of high-boned cheek. The room appeared as if we'd spent a week in bed instead of just one night. The reek of sex and flat champagne, 2 flutes, all shriek of carnal, sweet-drenched, sweet reunion, piqued my appetite for more. But she seems bleak. It won't work, Rick. You've lost the old mystique and turned into an aging, film-crazed geek, a droning and obsessive one-note freak. The door swings shut, but not before I speak. We'll still have Paris, kid, and that was magnifique. Next one is another mono-rhyme. Sort of a New York gallery poem. The gallery opening. I really like the subtle use of negative, space, in contrast with the positive, so that it all begins to seem so relative and consequently, if I may, evocative, which is precisely why it's so informative, provocative, and at the same time tentative. Not in the least judgmental, not competitive, but sort of kind of like almost illustrative. Collector? That sounds so accusative. I'm just, a bored executive who sometimes buys some art. Conservative, of course, and nothing too prohibitive. And you? I see that you're not talkative. I love that in a woman. Sensitive. And a couple with a political hinge. The candidate makes a public statement on a private matter, his wife at his side. There's something in the rules, I guess, to make them brave the scene, dead pale beside the jerk, because they all endure it. None will shirk the role. Not one has said, "Give me a break, you asshole. Can't you tell how much I ate? You're on your own." Instead, she takes her place and stands there shaky, life drained from her face, as hubby asks the world for time and space. There is no way, Jose, I am forewarned, you'd ever see me shame myself like that. I change the channel, give her knee a pat, suppress my little joke on women scorned. I'd like to think she'd stand by me, but still, I've never run for office, never will. I'll do the last one. Okay, I'll get to a serious one again. A Gloucester love song. She is, she says, a lighthouse keeper's daughter, and though she left the life her father chose, it's wind and rocks and ocean that she knows. And so she sits and croons and eyes the water, then land, then back to sea, as if she sought her place again, and blinks a smile that glows, then fades. In here I'm called 4 Roses Rose. The second time around, the smile is taught her. She's here at Lobster Tom's most afternoons, one hand around a glass, the thumbnail black. We share a window booth where she can see the sea past rusted fishing rusted packing shacks, the ruins of docks, the fishing tubs now gone to wrack. And soon she'll sing the songs she saved for me. Okay, I think that's it.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Everyone, you can unmute and applaud. Now's your cue. Wonderful. Those were so good, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcy.
So everyone, please save your questions for Michael and the other poets until the end. Our next poet, William Connolly, well, here's the introduction. After military service, William Connolly took a master's in literature under Edgar Bowers, no less, at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He did unrelated work in research and composition, and then returned to academia in the year 2000. Now retired from teaching and a dual citizen, he resides with his wife in Warwick, England in the West Midlands. Connolly's collection of early verse, Uncontested Grounds, was runner-up for the Able Muse Prize in 2014. So please welcome William Connolly. Take it away, William.
Thank you. Am I properly heard now?
Yes, you are.
One way or another, my poetry, like Michael's, derives from biography. Personal reference provides detailing I can be certain of. No trip to the library required. In addition to June 19th, today is Father's Day, so hunting. My father strides ahead of me. His khaki cap is all I see beside the barrel of his gun. We're hunting upland quail that run from us in loose community. The way is one that he knows best, zigzag downhill through scrub forest toward a catch pool where birds might drink. Young, quick to fire, I want to think a few small kills define our quest. But this day's hunting is on loan against the days I hunt alone. An arc of years, an ocean crossed, the old ways of provision lost, my quick objectives up and flown. My father was a military man, a gunnery officer stationed over here in England during World War II, later stateside with the Strategic Air Command. And of course, I grew up following illness. Once my fever broke, I struggled in the clammy bed to write my father, 6 years dead. This is nature's joke. You're the free spirit now, and I, the humbled man, afraid to die. The effects of my own years-long military hitch lingered after discharge, like most of these events do. This poem is titled R&R, and of course, anyone who's been around the military will know that stands for rest and recuperation. He came from war zones to the sea. It's pouring out and pouring back. It's loose and slow monotony. Along the fringe, where sight could reach, clay lands had broken to a rack as fine as salt to make a beach. An ocean was suffused with sky, a sky like water, vast and slack that vision could not occupy. Arrayed in both, a monstrous sun swam through the empty zodiac, defining many lights as one. Why he was there, he could not say. His purpose and a simple knack for travel ended where he lay and waited, blind to shade or shelter, for tripwork waves to arc and crack and tumble further through the swelter, as if mere waiting might rebuild the innocence good soldiers lack, once choices mean good people killed, as if this hot reductive shore could temper or refine him back, before the peace, before the war. Part of my military boy's life included moving, as my father moved, of course, station to station, air base to air base. I got used to pulling up stakes, inhabiting new schools and new towns. And of course, I developed preferences. A city song. Do not return me to the country, to the talcum dust that floats off tractor tires, that tints late light with seething rust and settles as a mineral snow on scrolling harrow cuts. Spare me the feed shop talk of drought, dry phases of the moon, eclipse, sunspots, a heated sea, and if by early June good rainfall hasn't averaged out, the near medieval gloom. Spare me as well the hired men who truck off Friday nights to crossroad bars, who hear the jukebox version of their plights blare gravely through ad-spangled murk, love and lose, drink and fight. Don't fetch me out to margin lands, bleached sour with daily sweat, where hard-won crops cannot quite pay the service of bad debt, whose sun-creased owner, folded now in broken wonderment, stands gazing past the auctioneer, the house and Chevrolet, to ponder not the property his neighbors bid away, but a blue, remorseless beauty that first lured him there and stays. Set aside, excuse me, after choosing Boston, at first, I lived in closely packed neighborhoods there, apartments full of students, windows open to the heat, TVs on all hours. And strange what you'd hear at night, of course. False summons. Outside, a woman calls my name. And though it's night and she's a stranger, I start up blinking just the same. Her voice is laced with hurt or danger. She skirts the darkened shrubs and lawn, still calling, I deduce, her cat. I can lie back again and yawn. No woman wants me quite like that. Set aside the locale, the neighbors, and television. When a fellow finally meets the right woman at the right moment, no place remains the same. Odd seed. Leaving the room 9 times in 10, you may assume return. Leave pen and pad, saucer and cup, push back, stand up and go. The 10th's another matter altogether though. Your arc extends a few steps further. Your walk around ends out of town, somewhere broadly different, and oddly, you root down. Rooting in this instance meant buying a house on 14 acres of woodlands in western Massachusetts and growing the family. In the 9th month, the unborn baby stirs beneath her heart, then thrusts out like a playful cat wrapped in a coverlet. It makes her start and pat her side. Please don't do that, she chides. You'll kick her mother's ribs apart. She knows the life adventure they've begun leads soon enough through racking change to open air, to earth and autumn sun, where all save she must loom as strange and unimportant to this little one. Yet propped with pillows on a worn divan, she has no thought of being brave. She feels instead her child, herself, her man, born on love's slow, momentous wave, accepting or exulting as they can. Obad, near the summer solstice. Blue light, not yet true light, but shadow passing grade by grade from pitch to lucent night, suffuses through the bedroom shade. Blue light that shows no source, that summons us toward consciousness from somnolent divorce until we vaguely acquiesce. A child turns in his bed. The first bird calls renewal through the soft air overspread by trellised boughs of rose and yew. Renewal, others call. Your foot comes reassuringly from its unsocial sprawl to nestle in against my knee. How good to feel your toes while shapes and colors reemerge, then gradually to doze again from recognition's verge into a causal light that blends our seeing with the seen. Let thought and sense unite near sleeping, emptied and serene. Of course, each new child carries an exclusive point of view into a household, a perspective older folks recall but can't quite fully immerse in. Palings emerge. So this is called palings. Beyond the pale, upstairs or down, I know when someone's moving. Floorboards betray him. Soft or slow, his path is marked for me to hear. Pipes whine with water when he drinks. His desktop hums his wish for silence, one sound binding other sounds. The time he braids new skeins of thought. Within the pale, circlets of words enclose him, all the tighter for his aggregates of loss or gain. If innocence entreats for sleep, he issues an adult command for wakefulness, denying dreams. What is a dream to hunger after nourishment words can't provide? Leave him, let be. Beyond the pale, night makes a blackboard of the porch. A rodent's claws scrape mark its wood before a cat contrives to hush them. Small bones crack. Beating at dawn, fresh pips of water run the eaves. They drop and burst on settle stones as childhood rouses me again. Childhood, yeah. Crows like shiny objects and collect them, usually in nests built in high, isolated places. The thought of treasure is enough to set off any young fellow's imagination. I've added a pearl to this poem, but the rest of the story you may presume to be true. Treasure. A carrion's crow's nest jostles with the wind, some 90 feet above pine carpetings, while limb by limb, up climbs the artless boy who's daydreamed there a cache of jewels and rings. Cheek daubed with pitch, one wrist and elbow skinned, he hugs the rough shaft towards its buoyant top and feels his childhood strain against the joy of adult strength and reach. Then comes the pop beneath his weighted foot as gravity rebukes him. Down he drops, flailed neck to thigh by breaking branches, leading new debris to the heaped earth where, gasping and contrite, he'll watch a pearl bead fall through shaken sky. One pearl bead, like the memory of light. For contrast, here's a completely fictional clip from childhood, imagined around a specific automobile, a Ford Galaxy. The Ford birthday ode. My sister lets me drive the Galaxy. It's 12 years old, seats 4 across and drips coal pitch. Planets and moons collide. I'm nearing loss of speech. I slide behind the wheel on waxy yellow plastic, seize a 2-hand grip, and off we barge. The universe beyond our farm heaves into reach on weak elastic, slow and large. I've low gear forward, no reverse, a fast foot pump to make a break. So nothing's this fantastic, sis. Above a wake of licorice smoke and impish bliss, we dip and slew along ellipse around the neighbor's poultry truck. The low gear howls. Hens peer from wooden crates and cluck. Should I attempt a crossing of the 4-lane interstate? Horse sense drags hard against the reins of luck. I could care less. I've turned 11, and sis, this galaxy is heaven. We lived near a pond north of Amherst, Mass, and had access to kayaks. So as the temperatures rose, we tried to get to the water early, high summer. The half hour after dawn, an amber light sheds from the spoon ends of your kayak paddle into dark and hurried water. It paints a broken glaze across the strokes you pull into those spinning pools that complicate wake water. One side, then the other, tip by tip, over the pond's flat emphasis, back and forth you dig the level water. But hold a stroke, hold, glide, a shallow arc to focus on the head and armored shoulders of a single painted turtle. Hawk beak agape just at the flood line, it meets your gaze with one black wink, then slips into the vaults of hidden water. In early September, with school kicked in again, a woodland couple might get away for a city-style vacation on Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard. Week's end. Brunching outdoors above the leeward bay, you gaze across the marsh that ripples from sparse cattail stands, a nesting medium of geese, towards stunted dunes swept low and gray, and find a yacht's mainsail and red spinnaker luffed on the cooling wind toward Falmouth Port. Out of the summer's dream in miniature, it bears a white-clad captain and consort. Of course you wave goodbye and turn to friends as quay and docks sway up and drop back from the midday launches heaving stern. Your voice is lost between the thrumming prop and yappings of a collie pup. Suitcases, bedrolls, bottles drained of summer sloth, an oil paint kit, the sea swell slapped to froth, all comment on the launch's sun-spent faces. Faces you'll glimpse again in idling cars, blocked by a bus, while a forbearing guide directs new tourists toward quaint chowder bars, the shops and beach as their interests decide. You nudge from lot to lane to boulevard, accelerate past showfront homes, cove views, stalls of antiques, crab rolls, cod barbecues, till passage alters what you can regard and seals you in a cell of wind aimed at New England's inner norms by turnpike lines. The autumn highlands ridged with oak and pines, its white one-steeple towns standing long pat against a short exploratory change. And finally home, bent toward a hardwood fire, watch tidal shadows set the shed and grange adrift at dusk, forgetful of desire. Is there room for another one, or is that about it?
Yes, go ahead.
With the offspring immersed in lives their own, photo albums tend to fill in for family gatherings. So some pictures in this one date back decades. In an album, our budding faces linger, pictured oddly angled, dowdy, candid, vowels of cheese tucked in the smiles. Snapped here when temperamental, there braced upright on a carousel, our hair and clothes in coarse-cut styles. We look abstract, defenseless, unanchored in our shifting senses. We're those hangers-on ourselves, the same who left at 17, renouncing where they'd always been to manage happenstance themselves. Yes, here we sit, same cloth, same pattern, a married pair conjoined to learn the building of inheritance, its inward arch, the latter viewing of deserted rooms. The auras cling, our leasehold on a cloistered manse. Yeah, I'll end there.
Wonderful, William. So everyone, please go ahead and unmute and applaud.
Thank you.
All right. Well, wonderful poems, William. Thank you. Our third reader, Deirdre O'Connor, is the author of 2 books of poems, most recently The Cupped Field, which received the 2018 Able Muse Book Award. Her work has appeared in Poetry, Crazy Horse, Cave Wall, McSweeney's Internet Tendency, and other journals. She directs the Writing Center at Bucknell University, where she also serves as Associate Director of the Bucknell Seminar for Undergraduate Poets. A native of Pittsburgh, she spent most of her life in central Pennsylvania, but has also lived in Japan and Ireland. So please welcome Deirdre O'Connor.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you to Michael and William for lovely readings, and of course to Karina and Alex for putting this together. I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. I thought I would start with a couple of poems from my book, The Cupped Field, and then move into some newer poems. And this poem is actually set just down the road from where I currently live in central PA. At the site of the Laurelton Village for feeble-minded girls of childbearing age. No ghosts, only witness trees, casting dark on lawns, cool nets, rustles above, alongside, where the fields were, maybe, green beans, cukes, tomatoes, where the grass now sways hip-high, hips in cotton dresses swayed, where the orchards, pear, plum, apple, baskets of them in arms, where stone was lifted and made an institution, porches painted white. Can't you see the ones called morons mending dresses, idiots shelling peas, the deviant berry pickers, water fetchers, milkers of cows, and those incorrigibles who couldn't be trusted with a shovel, weeding the long rain-loosened rows on hands and knees, scrubbing floors, hanging sheets to flap, and then by supper, spread again on beds. Can't you see yourself standing inside the corn, grown higher than faces? How you might watch the whores and nullipara dance like boys and girls, music drifting from open windows, curtains wafting as if in a film, and you alone in knowing what you are missing. No one seeming to notice, no one bashing through stalks to lead you back by the ordinary arm. And this next one, Sunflowers, seems sadly relevant again. I wrote it before I knew that sunflowers were Ukraine's flower, because it was about an earlier refugee crisis. A disarray of sunflowers in the field outside town. Some hang their heads, look askance at the land that will become their graves. They exude a crowded sorrow, like refugees at a fence. They make me think of backpacks crammed with diapers, toddlers in arms, and 8-year-olds walking along, hoodies, fleeces, veils. How American they seem, or fail to seem. So much depends upon where we are taken, what, given the climate, we expect. Now the evening light flows over and through the tops of trees, weightless, traveling like an idea of money, its cinematic gold brightens land people think they own. So often nostalgia is tinted the color of urine. So often a top-heavy flower nods like a person, blooming or stiffened, seeming to do all it can to last. And then when it goes quietly, under the kind of arrest we saw coming all over the planet. The next few poems are were written in Ireland or are about Ireland. And the first is called Neither Emigrant Nor Immigrant. My grandfather walks a field in Urid. The faintest rain glitters in the sun. I have no idea what he thinks, walking amid the stones, a fine rain settling into the weave of his coat, his hands fists in his pockets, his hands loose, at ease. I don't know loved or unloved, don't know hungry, fed. How often the bright air of such a day might shunt another thought aside, how rare it might become to think of it, or rare perhaps to notice thinking of it. I frame him in the camera of my phone, plant him in the middle of the field, all the fields. He's gone, he's here, alone among the others. And this is Prison Record, with an epigraph from the Irish prison registers that go up to 1924. 1849, Galway City, Ireland. Redmond Malloy, age 28, being of a party who stole 11 bags of meal from on board a boat that was conveying a cargo of meal from Galway to Roundstone, the property the Vice Guardians, Galway Poor Law Union, NB, Irish famine. Only yesterday, I discovered my great-great-grandfather hijacked a boat for cornmeal during the famine, steered it toward what must have been the hovel where he lived, islanded in the Atlantic, and was later sentenced to be hanged. Somehow he got off, and that's the turn to here. Coffee, AC, peonies in vases, my white body in pajamas, choosing not to watch the news, instead to play with language, anguish, ambush. Nocturne with Shaved Head. Oops, sorry. I wrote this in fall of 2019 when I was lucky enough to spend the fall right before the pandemic in Galway while my husband had a Fulbright at the National University of Ireland at Galway. Nocturne, and it references a documentary that was on TV and got a lot of press at that season. Nocturne with Shaved Head. Now it's like great bolts of silk are being unfurled in the sky. Occasional handfuls of pins tossed at the glass, brocade of the dark, kimono cloth, hypnagogic waves, the rise and fall of my husband's chest, his head shorn today by the barber, so it reveals his scalp, what the finest bristle permits. They say the head weighs about 11 pounds, the size of the baby he was at birth. His mother never failed to note he could have killed her, but she survived and had another even bigger one. I learned tonight you shouldn't dig a grave on a Monday unless you want to dig another one within the year. Also, when a slit in the throat reveals the carotid artery, it looks like calamari. This in a documentary intended to help us understand death. A man agreed in advance to let us see how chemicals restore the blush to his face. That's him, the undertaker said. fixing the glasses over his nose. Sometimes while my husband sleeps, I can almost make myself feel the baby he was, being lifted to a hip, his brow pressed against the soft of my throat. You'll see that this is obviously a somewhat surreal, dreamy poem, The Bear. I was surprised the airline allowed us to bring 2 foxes, a bear, and a kitten home from Paris. We had to find cardboard boxes in the airport, which was no problem. The floors were piled high. The foxes together immediately curled and slept, and the kitten in her separate box batted our hands until the flight attendant insisted we close the lid. The bear was expected to travel like a cello or upright bass, stashed in the back near the restrooms in his box, a flimsy coffin. A bear the size of an average man. His paws hung at his sides in apparent submission, while in tears we taped the box shut, having poked copious holes for air with a pen. The conditions were obviously inadequate, and this was a bear we felt confident could sit through a flight. A bear the color of damp sidewalk, the color of sadness, I thought, the color of a path that has no hope of reaching a destination beyond itself, no agency at all. Though the bear had been removed from a zoo and promised, in a language we had to assume he didn't understand, a better life elsewhere. His eyes darted with terror of being closed in, and his shoulders froze in a tension we shared, though of course ours didn't compare. Amazingly, the flight was smooth and we landed in New Jersey on time. The foxes and the kitten appeared no worse for the wear, indeed seemed energized. The bear, on the other hand, when we tore the tape from his box, slumped forward, massive, near-dead weight that almost knocked us down, though we held him up and kept holding as he gulped the American air drifting in from the tarmac and died raggedly, like a person does, in our arms. This next one is a new poem. Actually, yeah, it's a new poem, but I discovered an old draft that had gone nowhere and made it into this ode of sorts. Ode to the contents of a drawer in Pittsburgh. The orthodontic model of my teeth, for instance. I remove it from its box, gently as a doll brain might be lifted from its skull. Whose finger wore this fake ruby ring? Who carried beaded evening bags and kept them half a century before they landed here? From shaken out squares of velvet come crumbled roses, clipped obits, the size of postage stamps, infant curls in envelopes. And here's the rabbit's foot, the parquet darning egg, bivalve shells with gardens of Japan painted inside. A ponytail wrapped in plastic looks like a little chestnut mink. I can pretend it's still attached to the person I was becoming when it was scissored off, or the person I stopped becoming, all the people I meant to keep inside, those I lost by accident, by chance, and those I would not have imagined living as long as they have in me, no one else knowing. And I'll read 3 more. The first 2 are both called The Whole. I think I've written about half a dozen poems called The Whole in the last 6 months or so, sort of an experiment. The Whole. I like where you put the hole, someone said. I like the uncertain depth and texture. Like, is it a whole? Is it mind space, outer space, an evocation of a throat? Is it commenting on knowledge? Is it where we're about to go? Are we in process? Have we arrived? To what does it belong? Is it just me, or is it an illusion of cold, suggesting we should question whether we feel in normal ways, as if we could agree on what those are, and leading us to crave more warmth? Maybe it's only me feeling this great unmasked sensation that we're all on the edge together for once, looking at it. And again, the whole. Everything here is pungent, said the whole. Damp, severed, unsettled, raw, hairy, jagged, smooth, a mix. Clumped as well as loose, depending on what a hand grabs. Hard, soft, roots, worms, coins, antique toys, soldiers, marbles. Someone's lost marbles. I have them here, said the whole. They resemble the eyes of dolls. I even have the head of a doll circa 1940. Her neck, a rubber hollow, grazed by ruined hair, once ringleted, blonde, but now a mass of ash, bedraggled. Unreal hair in a hole like a grave that talks to you. If you think this sounds bad, wait till all the oceans rise. And I'll end with this one, which is also a new poem. Everything looked at can open. I keep asking, which is more believable, time or God? I think time, though it's illusion too, despite the dark softening of bananas and my mother in the ground. Yesterday, I could barely lift my boostered arm. Today it's fine, or almost fine. I passed through pain as if it were time, and it was, loosening like the peel of a still whole mandarin orange. Trying to be precise can feel like a calling or a tick. God's grandeur, the blink of an eye, everything looked at can open or be opened, though the smallest Russian doll contains only herself. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yahoo!
Very nice.
Okay, so three wonderful poets. Really enjoyed those poems, everyone. So I'm going to turn it over to the audience to ask questions. Please don't be shy. There's a couple of ways you can do it. You can just unmute and speak up, or if you'd rather I read the question, you can just type it into the chat and I'd be happy to read it aloud. So please go ahead and unmute and speak up or start typing.
Can I speak?
Absolutely, Charlotte.
Okay. Deirdre, I was very struck by your poems. Thank you. I felt like a couple of times and maybe more you were influenced by what we humans are doing to the environment, and especially the animals on the plain and the one of the whole poems, I think. And can you speak to that, or is that something new or something you?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think, climate change and just kind of everything that's happening in the world these days seems to creep in to my work. I can't say that it is deliberate, that I'm setting out to do that, but certainly like with the whole, I don't know, we'll see, because I'm still writing these poems and I wouldn't be surprised if more of them end up going in that direction, but they're also surprising me and going in totally different directions. So who knows? But yeah, I do think about it.
Thank you for them. Thank you for writing them. Yeah.
Thank you.
On this subject, do you, I have I'm translating Petrarch. I count to 14 and stop. Are the whole poems a kind of riff on a sonnet? How did you decide on the length of lines there? I mean, the size of your form.
They did start out kind of being, sort of sonnets. However, that seems to be shifting a bit. Like one, maybe it's about 8 lines. One is actually a haiku, but that's probably going to be trashed eventually. And then some are a little bit longer. But again, this is really quite new. But I intended to make them 14-liners, but they're not behaving in quite that way at this moment.
Hey, it's working for you. Congratulations. Those are lovely.
All right, next question. So I've got a question for all 3 of the poets. I'm wondering if you could just tell us the story of your initiation into poetry, either, when it was first read to you and you fell in love with it, or when you wrote your first poem. So why don't we start with Michael?
Okay, am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. I always wanted to be a writer, which is why I went to engineering school. And I really didn't start writing seriously until I finally got rid of the job, which I hated, but it let me see the world at everybody else's expense, and started writing. And my dreams were to write short stories, to be a Hemingway. And after about a year or 2 of that, and no success at all, I realized that I was spending more time rewriting a sentence over and over and over again and getting every little nuance right. And I was counting syllables and checking, schmuck, what are you doing? You're a poet. And that's when I started. Prior to that, I never, ever thought of myself as a poet. So I really didn't start writing poetry until I was in my 60s.
Wow, that is such an interesting story. Thank you, Michael. And William.
Well, I suppose I always had an interest in writing, and the first year that I was in the military, I was in the regular Air Force instead of the hyped up version that the Academy presents. And so I had time. And we also had an on-base library. So I literally just went up there and started reading anything I felt like. And I came across E. Cummings, as a matter of fact, and figured, gee, I could do this. And, as you do, before you realize the ins and outs of what you're attempting. And I suppose that's where it started. And then when I decided to leave the academy to quit before graduation, I was tipped off by somebody who was a Major Galt, actually, who would an interesting guy in his own right and had a book of poetry out and had been a fighter pilot in Korea and all that. And he said, well, if I was doing it over again, I'd go study with Edgar Bowers. And so I did. And never regretted that.
Wow, what luck to get that advice. That's terrific. Thank you. And Deirdre.
I wrote a couple of poems or so in high school that were, cheesy and horrible, and I threw them away. And I remember my mother found them in the wastebasket and kind of saved them, and that was just mortifying to me. But I did then start writing more in college. But in high school, I think we had a little anthology that included a lot of Dickinson poems and oddly Stephen Crane. And I had read a little bit of Sylvia Plath. So these were some of the people I first started reading.
All right, terrific. Thank you, Deirdre. Okay, we've got 15 minutes at least for some more questions, so don't hold back. Who's got one? Lee, I have to say, Lee Bahan, that when people were reading, you were being so enthusiastic, even though you were muted. I was like, oh, this is the one thing that I don't like about Zoom readings, because your energy and enthusiasm were were terrific.
Can I?
All right, go ahead, Mike.
On that?
Yes.
Yeah, I have the same feeling, and what I find is that whenever I'm at a Zoom poetry reading, everybody is muted, and the lack of applause really drives me up a wall. Maybe it's because a lot of my poems are humorous, but I feed off that applause. I want to hear it. It turns me on, and I read and I get more involved in the poems and so forth. And I wonder, is it really necessary to mute everybody? I mean, if I was reading in an auditorium or to an audience, you hear traffic outside, you hear chairs scrape. There are certain other sounds that come in anyway. But to me, the silence that I'm reading into is sort of a turnoff.
It's like reading into the void, the existential void. Yeah, I agree. It's not ideal. Who else has a question?
Well, I have a question for all the poets reading. Now, I want to know what is it that triggers an experience or a thought into making a poem out of it, and how do you begin writing the poem, and how do you know when you've completed the poem? For all the three poets here.
Well, I could speak to that example that I sort of hinted at with Treasure. That little poem was delivered to me as a story by the brother of the postal clerk in Leverett, Massachusetts, and that was he did that in his childhood or his young manhood. Climbed this 90-foot white pine tree, which were harvested by the British Navy and hauled out to the Boston Harbor to make masts for their sailing ships. Huge trees. And he had decided that he would climb that tree because he could see a crow's nest up there, and he was absolutely sure that there was treasure in it. And he climbed up there and fell, as he got near the top, and broke branches all the way down to the bottom. And I as he was telling me this, I said, I can't believe this. You fell 90 feet and you didn't break a leg, didn't break an arm. Well, he not only landed on the cushioning of pine needles and the droppings those trees, just shed all year long. And he broke branches all the way down. He said he was black and blue for weeks. And I walked off and think, boy, that's a poem. I don't know how to write it. And I probably waited a year before I wrote the thing, sifting it through my mind and trying to fit it into 14 lines, not waste any space and do justice to him too. Of course, I never told him I wrote it, but that's another matter. So I think an example, you start with a moving story and then move on from the story to encapsulating it some way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
With me, I think it's often a little more deliberate. I will say, okay, I want to write a poem and go through what interesting happened to me. It was a lot easier when I was doing a lot more traveling. And say, okay, I'll do that. And then almost systematically try to decide what form to use or whether it's to be free verse. And very often early on in a poem, I will write out lists of rhymes. I'll make a list of 10 or 20 rhyming words that I can use, and then alternate rhymes as well. So it's unfortunately, I tend to write a bit like the engineer and businessman I was for so many years.
I would say that I usually start with a line or two, and then, sort of play with it, and maybe it becomes something. Maybe it just goes into the folder on my laptop. Sometimes when I'm stuck, I will set out to write like a sonnet or something like that, because I do find that that the formal demands can make it a little bit easier to get going if I'm stuck.
Thank you all.
All right. We've got some questions in the chat. So this is from Emily Billman. First question, she has two questions. One for William Connolly. What do you think is the relationship between poetry and the military or military defense?
Well, I think when I was in the military, I was very much using my writing as my keeping a journal.
Hey,
just
Dad,
sort of,
Dad, can you, sorry to interrupt you, Dad, but your camera has pointed down. Can you tip it back up so we can see your face? Thank you.
sorry. Spillover of experience, I think, and not knowing quite what to do with the experience as well. When I got out of the military, I thought, well, I'll write a novel about the military. That would be my big motivation to learn more about writing and to pursue different aspects of it. But the more I did that, the less interested in it I was. There's so many books about the military. Catch-22 comes to mind that you think, why would I want to compete with that, let alone try to do better? And so in that book, Uncontested Grounds, that Alex publishes for me, there's quite a few military poems, but they're kind of dance around the edges, in fact. Some of them very intuitive. One of my roommates was at the academy, was shot down over Laos, and I found that I'd written a poem that almost mirrored his experience of trying to fly too fast and too low over a situation where you've been warned not to go, and haven't come into grief or nearly come to grief with it. So there was a lot of searching, probably in the subconscious mind to find out, where to hang my interests and where to pursue them and where to leave them. Does that answer the question, or does it raise more?
Probably both.
Yeah. Can I say something? Yeah, thank you very much for the answer. I'm in Geneva in Switzerland, and I gave a conference once on poetry, but the poetry of another country, the national poet of Israel, and the question of the audience was, what do you think is the relation between poetry and the military? So since you have been in the military for long years, so this now I'm asking you the question. I asked you the question, and thank you very much for the answer. You have directed me into another path, because when I thought about the question, which at the time I did not answer, even though I had the answer. For me, the relation between poetry and the military is language, and language as defense, poetic language as defense, and the military as the defense of a country, the defense of our values, the defense of a land. But you have channeled me into another direction, and I thank you very much. And I had another question for Deirdre. Thank you very much for your readings. I enjoy them very much. My question was, what inspired you to write about holes? Is that a metaphor? Is that a metaphor, which could be, but I would like to have your idea. And then what is interesting for me from a technical point of view is in the first poem about the hole, where you have statements, you have statements, but they substitute rhetorical questions. Yeah. So was that intentional? Or, yeah. And what was going on in your mind when you did that? Sorry, I speak too much.
No. Thank you for the question. I think the whole is meant to be a metaphor. I have no idea how it. I think the first line. I'm looking back at the poem. I think the first line that I heard was, "I like where you put the hole," and it's like that's so weird, kind of like painting, and then. But I thought it was interesting. I think I wrote this around like early January, maybe around New Year's. It was it's still the pandemic, but like it was so cold and it had been going on so long, and it was just like, here we are. I think it was an attempt to get at a moment of feeling that I felt I was not the only one, that I was confident I wasn't the only one feeling. And in terms of the intent, whether those statements were intentional, it was really just playing around that got me to that. I think I had read something that had mind space in it, and I was like, oh, that is cool. I hadn't known that was a word. And that, I think, enabled me to do some sort of more abstract things than I would have normally felt comfortable with. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we've got time for this one last question. It's a question for all three poets. It's from John Drury. He says, who would you single out as the poet whose work means the most to you, and why?
I guess I can go first. I don't know. I'm sure I would answer it differently on a different day. But today, I think I would say Elizabeth Bishop, partly because a student in the seminar for undergraduate poets, I can hear in his poems, he loves Elizabeth Bishop, and I can hear in his pacing and in his sort of visual sensibility and his quality of overhearing that he has learned a lot from Bishop. And it was a useful reminder of how much I learned from Bishop and how much I really love a lot of Bishop's work.
Okay, I won't change my mind. T.S. Eliot, which I know is, right down the middle of the plate, but he was the first poet I ever read, and he loves words, and he loves playing with words, and there's a sense of humor, even in a lot of his serious work that gets to me. And as I said, I came to poetry quite late, and Eliot was the guy. And I even have a poem about attending a reading of his at one time. Yeah.
Well, I'll go back to my mentor, Edgar Bowers. I'd read very loosely. In fact, I'd read a lot of Eliot, a lot of E.E. Cummings, and Edgar sort of said, "Well, wait a minute here. What are you going to do about the Renaissance?" What are you going to do about, structured verse? What are you going to do about rhyme and meter? You can't just let it all flow away. You have to learn it, and then you can make those decisions. So he was important to me, not just as a human being, but as a guide that way.
All right. Well, thank you again to all three of our terrific poets. Thank you to Alex Peppel. Thank you to Karina. And thank you to everyone in the audience for coming out today to hear our poets and ask such terrific questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Alex for any closing remarks you'd like to make, and have a wonderful rest of the day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you to our wonderful poets, Bill and Michael and Deirdre. And thank you, Jim, for doing such a marvelous hosting job. And I'll also remind everyone to support the poets by getting their books, wherever books are sold, from the Press's website or from anywhere else. So that will help encourage them to write some more fantastic stuff like they have so far. Thank you all, and see you next month at the next reading.
Thank you. Thanks, Alex.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.